Hi everyone, my name's Ed Curry and I'm here to welcome you to our webinar today for the Data Spaces Alliance in Ireland. And today's speaker will be Vivi Letinogen, who will talk about lessons on cross-border data sharing from the Potato X project. Just before we kick off, what I want to do is to kind of give a brief introduction to Data Spaces and the alliance that we're trying to establish here in Ireland, just to kind of give a little bit of context for what we want to achieve over the next kind of few months with these webinars. I'm joined today by Rafiq Al-Haq, who is a researcher here at Insight, and Rafiq will facilitate the webinar with Vivi. So just to kind of set the context, back in 2020, the European Commission launched the European Strategy for Data. And one of the key things about this was to improve the free flow of data within Europe, and the succession of effectively that European data strategies is now what they've started consultation on, which is a European data union. And the purpose here in the European Data Union is to really kind of look at the role that data plays in kind of bolstering AI innovation and adoption within Europe by ensuring that you have access to high quality data, curated data across different industries, across different research domains, and also to and from the public sector as well. When we look at both of these strategies, one of the kind of key tools or the key implementations of these strategies is what's known as a common European data space. So just for people that are not familiar with that, a data space is not something that's just technical, but it's actually something that's technical, that covers legal aspects, governance aspects, and operational aspects as well. So really, it's really trying to understand what is the infrastructure, both technical and non-technical legal, that's needed to be able to support data sharing basically across Europe. The purposes of these data spaces is to be able to improve a number of different things within Europe. So one of them is obviously looking at the innovation potential that exists around data. How can we leverage European data more in developing products and services, which are now increasingly becoming more AI centric? And how do you ensure that you have like a valid business ecosystem around that data economy as well? How are you ensuring that we have the correct scaling and monetization of data and data-driven business models? But beyond just the economic aspect of it as well, how can data improve the resilience of Europe overall, whether it's looking at our digital sovereignty, whether it's looking at transparency on our supply chains, when it's looking at the adaptability of those supply chains to global shifts and to responding to different types of emergencies or global priorities. And then finally, also looking at, I suppose, the most existential thing that we have in terms of climate change, and are there opportunities around that as well? So there's lots of opportunities for data spaces to drive value in many different aspects of European society. At a very high level, the strategy from the Commission is to establish these common European data spaces in different sectors, everything from health to mobility to energy, and what we're talking about today is agriculture. And the key thing here is looking at each of these sectors individually to understand who are the data producers and consumers there, what are the organizations that are involved that could benefit from sharing data, and then trying to establish data spaces that suit the needs and the requirements of each of those sectors. To kind of help support the establishment of all of the data spaces, we have the Data Spaces Support Center, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, but this is the overall high-level European strategy. In terms of data space research within Ireland, at Insight, we've actually had a long history of researching the kind of core technologies right back to the start of the 2010s, that kind of the core technologies that are needed to enable data spaces around semantic interoperability, data governance, and the different types of infrastructures that are there. Also promoting the adoption of standards such as data catalog standards with W3C, and basically working with different stakeholders within Ireland, but also across Europe and the world to deliver on that. I mentioned the Data Space Support Center, and Insight and the University of Galway are part of that as well. And this is really a pivotal project in terms of ensuring that there's a kind of a consistent and a kind of horizontal support to the development of all of these different data spaces. The DSSE looks at developing best practices, blueprints, design principles, co-creation methods. So it basically has a full toolkit to support the design, the deployment, and the operationalization of these common European data spaces. When we look at the rollout of the data spaces, so they've kind of started in 2023 with a number of what they kind of call proprietary actions, basically identifying what are the requirements in the different sectors that have been identified. And what we're now starting to see in 2025 is that a number of these are now moving towards the deployment phase, understanding what's needed to be able to actually deploy these and to actually set up and operationalize these data spaces. And we can see that there's a number of them that have actually started this year around tourism, Green Deal, energy, mobility, and agriculture. So basically, the purpose of our Data Space Alliance Ireland is to recognize that while there is a European effort taking place that's driven by the Commission and the Data Space Support Centre and other initiatives, it's also important to organize things locally as well within the Irish ecosystem. And we've kind of taken inspiration from other alliances that have been set up in other member states. So we have the Data Space Alliance in Finland, we have one in Belgium as well, and the Data Sharing Coalition in the Netherlands. And what we kind of see is the opportunity here is within the Irish context and the Irish data ecosystem, how do we try to, first of all, raise awareness of the European data strategy, the forthcoming European Data Union, and the role that common European data spaces will play? How do we support the adoption of data spaces by Irish organizations, both public sector and private sector? Can we facilitate connections from the Irish stakeholders to those European initiatives through the Data Space Support Centre and other initiatives that are taking place? And then are we able to kind of provide technical support and guidance and advice to the Irish ecosystem as well? So really the goal here is to be a forum for discussion, for information, but also support and trying to drive the establishment of an Irish data ecosystem that can be a full participant within the common European data spaces. So as part of that, we've started this webinar series. So we're going to have probably one webinar a month just to advertise next month's webinar. We'll be talking about the language data space, and we have Penny talking about that. And she's involved in the European language data space, and that'll be on the 8th of July. But today we actually have Vivi, who's going to talk about her role in the Potato X data space and how that connects to the agricultural data space as well. So I'm going to pass over to Rafik, who will introduce Vivi, and we will talk to you later.
Morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Ed, for a very comprehensive introduction of data spaces and also a bit of about the Data Space Initiative Ireland. So now I would like to invite Vivi for presenting the Potato X, and it's really a great honor to presenting Vivi as a speaker for this webinar. Vivi has an outstanding experience on the Data Space Initiative, particularly on the strategic side of it. She is serving different roles in different organizations, including 1001 Lake, My Data, which are really prominent institute for promoting the data space initiatives and data spaces within European territories. Vivi, I'd like to invite you, so please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Rafik. And I'll just pull up my slides for you. All right, brilliant. So thank you so much for the kind introduction and for the opportunity to be here to talk to you today. So my topic is cross-border agricultural data sharing, and specifically the role of data spaces and intermediaries. And I'll be drawing on lessons that we learned in the Potato X project, which is incidentally my favoritely named project ever. And just for a little bit of context of where I'm coming from and the kind of perspective I bring to these topics. My name is Vivi, and I'm calling in from Helsinki in Finland today. I'm the CEO of the My Data company, but I also wear, as mentioned, a couple of other hats. So as a senior data strategist for 1001 Lakes, I manage the Potato X project. As senior advisor for My Data Global, I also participate in the Data Spaces Support Center project, where My Data Global is one of the partners, and my contributions include investigations around the topics of intermediaries and operators in data spaces. And I'm also a researcher. I'm working on my PhD project at the University of Helsinki and also in collaboration with Aalto University, also here in Finland. And my research focuses on the moral philosophy of data and technologies, AI, and so on. So the key takeaway to remember from this slide is that I am neither a lawyer nor a technologist. I'm really a philosopher at heart. So this kind of informs the way I approach these kinds of projects and how I talk about them. And there's a QR code there for my LinkedIn profile if you want to connect now or afterwards. It would be great to hear your feedback and thoughts. So what I'm gonna be talking to you about today is briefly described here. So first, after Ed's great introduction, there's very little need to set the scene, so I'll do that very briefly and talk to you a little bit about what data spaces are and the context in which they operate. But the bulk of the presentation I will spend on talking about the use case pilot, which is Potato X. I'll talk you through what we tried to achieve, what we set out to do and managed to do, what were the kinds of challenges that we investigated in this project, and what were the results and learnings that we drew from this exercise. And I'll conclude with a couple of personal reflections at the end. So for setting the scene, the agriculture industry, just like any industry vertical today, generates vast amounts of data. And we all, I think, agree that the data holds immense potential for a number of different kinds of applications. It can inform a range of different kinds of policy decisions, from agricultural subsidies to climate change mitigation policies and so on. This data can drive technological innovation. It can also enable better business outcomes for industry, as well as serve common social and environmental objectives. But to kind of really tap into this potential value that the data has, it is a given that we need the data generated to be more available, more usable, and more actually used across the entire value networks of the sector. And in this case, we're talking about the agricultural or agri-food sector. So in order to address the kind of underuse and underavailability of agricultural data and data in the various industry sectors that Ed also mentioned, the 2022 data strategy set out to start piloting, building, deploying data spaces. So the 2022 data strategy kind of which described the Commission's ambitions for the period of 2020 to 2025 really kind of picked up this idea of data spaces as a policy priority. And right now, the new Commission is developing, as Ed mentioned as well, the data union strategy, which will continue the development and deployment of data spaces in Europe. So it's always helpful, especially when you come from a philosophy background, to define your terms. So what is a data space? The working definition that I'll be using is this. It is an interoperable framework based on common governance principles, standards, practices, and enabling services that enables trusted data transactions between participants. So in a word, it's a framework. And this definition was adopted by the DSSC in our glossary and is based on the CEN Workshop Agreement on Trusted Data Transactions. And in kind of my talk about the Potato X project, I'll specifically be looking at some of the aspects of interoperability, some of the aspects of governance, as well as these enabling services that are mentioned as elements of data spaces in this definition. So, but also understand that data spaces don't exist in a vacuum. I really like showing this kind of layered hamburger picture of the context within which data spaces can be understood. So data spaces are always part of a larger ecosystem. And data spaces support one or more use cases, which in turn include a number of participants that together make up the use case. So the ecosystem is also always broader than the data space itself. A data space is something that is kind of drawn, scoped and limited by the governance authorities' decisions and what we refer to as the rulebook or the governance framework of the data space. And the point of the data space is to support these use cases where two or more participants use the data space infrastructure, framework, enabling services, and so on to create value for the individual participants in the use case, and therefore for the data space and the whole ecosystem. So the Potato X project that I'll go into next was a very short project. It was a 6-month pilot. It was funded by the Finnish Gaia X Hub that was operated by the Finnish Innovation Fund Sitra. And it was executed by a number of partners. So I was involved on behalf of 1001 Lakes. We are a Finnish consultancy who specialize in multilateral data sharing arrangements from the governance, business, legal, and technical points of view. We also had Dataspace Europe, who is a Finnish data intermediary. We had the Peter Klovos group, Peter is a Finnish potato farmer. We also had AVR, who are a Belgian farming machinery manufacturer, and Ilvo, who is a Belgian data intermediary. And we were also supported by another Finnish consultancy called Taival. So these were the participants that made up the use case kind of pilot that we called Potato X. And what we set out to try and achieve was to improve farming yield, specifically potato farming yield, based on farming machinery data. And the idea was to develop a commercially driven pilot service. We also wanted to explore cross-data space governance using the Citra rulebook model, which includes data usage policies, and we wanted to also automate some of the data contracts taking place in this use case. This was an exercise also in practicing cross-border data sharing and interconnectivity between the two intermediary services. That's Stritom by the Finnish intermediary and Just Connect by the Belgian intermediary. And also one of the objectives for the project was to showcase a pilot service implementing automated smart contracts between parties in a cross-member state EU level showcase. So what we actually set about to do was kind of connecting the 4 white dots on this slide. So on the bottom right-hand corner, you have Peter. Peter is a Finnish potato farmer. He uses an FMIS service, so that's the Farm Management Information System. And he also has AVR machinery on his farm. Now, AVR machinery comes connected with a cloud service called AVR Connect, where machine use data gets uploaded and can be accessed. Now, the AVR Connect service is integrated with Ilvo's Just Connect platform for or an intermediary service, which is specialized in agricultural sector data. On the other hand, on the right-hand side, the FMIS of Peter, our farmer, is connected with the Tritom service, which is an intermediary service by Dataspace Europe, at the moment focusing specifically on agricultural data as well. So what we wanted to explore was how can we bridge and connect and support the interoperability between the two intermediary services at the top there, so that's Just Connect and Tritom, so that Peter's farming data can come from AVR Connect straight into his farm management information system. Without him having to use two different kinds of systems for different kinds of data, and for him to be able to also combine and analyze the AVR data with other data in his farm management information system. So this is kind of like the pilot. This is what we tried to do, and we kind of looking back on it, like the three kinds of challenges and learnings that we addressed and derived were first technical and semantic interoperability of the data and the systems involved. So for obvious reasons, the AVR data is in certain types of formats. And we need to make it interoperate with the farm management information system that our farmer Peter uses. We also need to establish technical connectivity between the two intermediary services and their systems. On the other hand, we also needed to make sure that we're in compliance with the relevant regulatory frameworks, and that this use case is also kind of governed in a trustworthy way. Whenever you have people, systems, and organizations cooperating around data, trust gets brought up as a major consideration. And so this was one of the kind of challenges to address. Maybe not a challenge, but at least like an issue to make sure that we tackle well. And finally, obviously, this needs to make business sense. This needs to benefit for benefit each individual actor, for the use case as a whole to make any sense. So I'll talk you through each one of these three types of challenges and results and learnings next. So on the technical and semantic interoperability side, what we did was we produced basic descriptions of service products and required data products. We set out the requirements for technical connectivity between the intermediary services. We specified and implemented an automated data contract prototype, and successfully implemented a technical connection between the two intermediary systems using a bridge. And what we learned from this exercise, this work, was that the usefulness of existing GaiaX technical components to actually implement these infrastructure functionalities in practice was relatively low. And this is, by the way, I forgot to say that this project took place last year. It concluded in May of last year. And what we also learned that there's yet a lot of work to be done to enable the formalization and enforcement of more complex rules than simple permission of data sharing exists or does not exist. So our prototype basically worked operated on this binary, whether there existed permission to share the data from one intermediary to the next or not. But obviously, this is not all that is relevant to data sharing, especially multilateral data sharing use cases. So more complex rules like, is there a valid subscription to the relevant service existing, or some temporal bounds on between what times data can be shared and cannot be shared, and so on. There's a lot of work to be done to enable the kind of formalization and enforcement of these kind of more complex rules. And then on the regulatory compliance and trustworthiness of the governance side, what we did was we developed a rulebook. It was co-developed by all the actors in this use case and covers this specific use case. But we are pretty confident that it can be easily extended to include also other use cases. And the specific focus for this rulebook development was on aspects of data governance between two data intermediaries and the related contractual issues there. But we did show how one could implement the basic principles of the Data Governance Act and the Data Act in practice. Now, what we learned from here is that the Citra rulebook model can be applied and adapted to these kinds of use cases, even when we're dealing with business and legal governance frameworks for multiple intermediaries. And something that became just incredibly clear throughout this project was that the applicability of the GDPR to farmers' machinery data remains an open issue. So on this, I mean, the most complex cases are you have individuals or individual families who own and operate farms. Then you have individuals who use machinery owned by the farm that is a business, or they have contractors who come in with their own machines, but use the data on the farmer's land. And each one of these parties has a certain set of rights related to the data, for example, geolocation data that is generated by using this farming equipment. Not to mention that, I mean, the fact that, if you have a family farm, then your business information is also your personal financial information. So the kind of there exists this gray zone between personal and non-personal data that becomes like a concrete issue when you're dealing with these kinds of farming machinery data sharing cases. And then finally, on the business sense and benefits of this whole exercise. So as a result, we were able to demonstrate concrete value for the different stakeholder groups in kind of represented in this pilot. So for potato farmers, we could demonstrate about or a bit under €2,000 a year increased profit based on improved yield, which resulted from the data being shared. For equipment providers, we could demonstrate about €300 a year additional connectivity service sales per farm. For intermediary service providers, we identified a €350,000, €100,000 service monetization and collaboration market size as a whole. And for digital service providers, for example, FMIS, we estimated roughly €900 a year revenue from these kinds of data sharing exercises. And we were also able to demonstrate scalability potential because there are about 1 million farmers in Europe that are about the right size and scope for this kind of data-driven yield improvement services that were illustrated in the Potato X pilot. So one of the this kind of results were the first time I was seeing kind of numbers on this kind of level of detail, which was incredibly valuable and insightful for all of us. And it just really highlighted the learning that it's critically important to understand the business logics of each of the actors in this kind of a context. And just to close with a couple of reflections, this is something I've been saying for some time, but this really kind of reinforced for me again that human interoperability is a really critical foundational layer for any exercise like this to work. So individual people in individual organizations need to trust each other to be able to work together. And this is part of the rulebook process that 1001 Lakes coordinated in the Potato X project, is that we need to bring relevant individuals from the different organizations together to agree on the ground rules and basic principles of collaboration. And it is really about individual people trusting, being able to trust each other because in part because they've been able to work on these things together. Another aspect of this, what I call human interoperability, is mutually intelligible language when we come from different traditions. So, for example, policy, the word policy means one thing in business, completely different thing in legalese or in legal language, and in technical context, it has yet another kind of meaning. And then something that really, really helps is when people are able to focus on the same and most appropriate conceptual layer at the same time. So are we discussing the ecosystem? Are we discussing the entire data space? Are we discussing this particular use case? Are we discussing this participant when we're talking about, for example, the business model, you know? And then the other kind of point that I wanted to highlight here was that the most pressing challenge is the data spaces succeeding, which I'm not sure if I know how I would define the success of data spaces, but the most pressing challenges, in my experience, revolve around finding compelling business cases, not just use cases, but business cases that make sense on each of these conceptual levels. So for each individual participant organization, whether you're a for-profit or non-profit, every organization has a business model. Money has to come in from somewhere and it goes out, right? So regardless of your profit motive or business model, like participation in these kinds of data sharing arrangements needs to make individual sense to each participant. It also needs to make collective sense to all of the participants of a use case. It needs to be a win-win situation for the collective that is putting together the use case. Then for data spaces that support this multiple use cases with their infrastructure and enabling services, they also need to have a business logic and a business case to support a use case. And then finally, like the entire ecosystem needs to benefit somehow, or it just won't happen. And with that, I thank you very, very much. And really happy to have a conversation and answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vivi. We are absolutely on time. It was a great presentation. Thanks to have you here once again. And it's really, really very much interesting that the presentation in terms of like your learning of Potato X in terms of like challenges of implementing data spaces and the different other aspects was really very much enjoyable. So now I would like to invite the participants. If you have any question, please feel free to raise your hands, or you can even type in chat box if you have any question. Otherwise, Vivi, I mean, I have a couple of questions for you. Now, and then like let's see that if audience can come up with their with newer questions or better questions. So Ireland is a kind of like you can see you can consider it as a very strong country in terms of like agricultural industry. So how do you think that Ireland can take or let's say that the benefit of the data spaces or implementing the data space? I mean, what's the best approach it could be at this stage? Because we know that to the best of our knowledge so far that there is no agriculture data space implemented yet. So what would be your suggestion? I was wondering.
I think that's a really good question. I mean, as practical as possible, I think is would be my suggestion right now. So there's a lot of great work done by yourselves and others on the kind of theoretical foundations and principles and standards around data spaces. So there's and then we do have this kind of overarching regulatory and policy framework in place. So we have the kind of the technical and the legal enablers in place in Europe, but the kind of very kind of where the rubber hits the road kind of practical implementations are I think where we need to look at next. And for those, I would highlight again the kind of second reflection that I had at the end there, that this needs to make business sense for it to happen. So I believe in this kind of dialogue between top down and bottom up, and we've been and I think it's time to kind of swing a little bit from the top down to the bottom up, and then start seeing the kinds of business cases that data spaces enable popping up. And then like just, I think sharing knowledge and having forums like this one is critically important for to refer to my second reflection, which is like this is in like at the end of the day, this is about people. People need to work together for data spaces to happen, for data to get used and any benefits to be gained from there. So kind of active discussion, dialogue, insight and information sharing is something that can't be overstated, I don't think.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you very much, Vivi. Well, I'm just sharing with you our experience because we had a very interesting project we did in feasibility study, which was funded by ACI. Thanks to ACI, by the way, like we got a very deep understanding about the current situation of Irish data ecosystem, particularly in the mobility sector. It was very much focused on the mobility sector. So we interviewed different types of stakeholders, including private and public. And what was the major point that particularly the public sector stakeholders were highlighting is that it's very difficult to trust someone, with data. In a sense, they're saying that, okay, we have, let's say that, consider that we have Uber here in Ireland, we have Free Now and the different other services. So how these people can trust or how the trust could be established between the provider and the consumer that my data is not going to be exploited or abused. So that's one primary challenge that we found. And that in data space support center we always say that trust is the main challenge, and data always move at the speed of trust. If there is no trust, data doesn't move. So you believe that you mentioned about Citra rulebook. So do you believe that Citra rulebook could be a potential solution to establish the trust between the consumer and the provider in Ireland? So that sort of, uh, elements can be used.
Absolutely. It's a really handy tool. And it's, I think, specifically suited for governing use cases, as well as then kind of it can be used for entire data spaces, but especially if you kind of take the advice of like starting very concrete and from use cases. I think the Citra rulebook is excellent for governing those, and also for kind of facilitating the process required for people to trust other people. But on the kind of ecosystem layer level, if we think of it in those terms, we do also have the Data Governance Act, which is being reviewed at the moment, and there will be a legislative proposal coming out for a revised text of the DGA containing some revisions to Chapter 3 on data intermediaries. And I think this is also and a direction to look at for specifically for building trust. So the point of the DGA is to regulate data intermediation service providers who fulfill certain set of criteria that guarantee that they adhere to high cybersecurity standards, that they are not abusing the data that they help kind of transmit and share, and so on. So especially with the revisions, which I'm very optimistic about, I do see these kind of trusted European, both kind of infrastructure and application providers as critical to supporting the trust in our data sharing ecosystems. Because one of the problems with cases like Uber is that you have the infrastructure for data sharing and the application on top of it controlled by the same company. And this creates certain incentive structures that can lead to the abuse, misuse, or in otherwise exploitation of the data against the people's best interest and explicit consent, even when who are using the service. So the Data Governance Act tries to split that in two, to make sure that the infrastructure providers who kind of intermediate the data are separate from the application providers, and you can choose, and we can kind of like mix and match those different levels, and this kind of structural separation also acts as a guarantee that you can trust that what you hope and want to happen with your data actually does, and nothing else.
Thank you very much, Bibi. Thanks a million for the insight. Yeah, you brought this like the business side of it, and also about the intermediaries. And there was one more discussion I'm bringing, like from the mobility data space, because like we have a bit of experience, as I was saying, that it was a funded feasibility study project. So regarding these intermediaries, as we know that technically speaking, the data space is not a centralized repository. So this is a very much misconception, perhaps, like people make at in the very beginning when we talk about data space. Data space means like a government data portal. So everything is there, so people are going to share, but it's in fact data space is not like that. It's basically I'm the provider and there are millions of providers, so they're basically going to the marketplace and the consumer is there, so consumers are there, so they buy the data, they purchase the data. So that facilitates the data space only facilitates the transaction between the provider and consumer. Now, one of the point that like in our discussion or in our workshop was made is that, well, if the Irish like if we want to build an Irish mobility data space, let's say, right? So who is gonna own the whole like infrastructure, that framework? So because that framework is a responsibility, right? So who is going to own this? So the either it's going to be, I mean, is it going to be, for example, a third party service provider or the government, like the Ministry of like transport, or I mean like who, and what's the interest there? So I mean, that means like then it's the incentives involved, right? So incentives from all aspects, like they're not only from the provider side, but also who is providing that framework. So what's your experience on that? Who normally facilitates those? I mean, what kind of participants facilitate? Is it like only the intermediaries, or someone gets involved also to provide the framework, the technical framework, I meant?
I think that's a really good question, and I think that's something that we've thought about, as you know, in the data spaces support center context a lot as well. Like who owns the data space? I think I because a data space is by definition a kind of decentralized architecture. It's the kind of control should also be decentralized. So I personally see and like models where a data space governance authority, which is kind of the role that owns the technical infrastructure, is a general assembly of participants. So you have the ministry, the kind of uh, data sources, data using services, data intermediaries who provide enabling services for the infrastructure, all kind of come together in a democratic forum to make the controlling decisions. But then there's a kind of executive organization that controls the technical infrastructure. But how that is then funded, you have different kinds of models for that. One is that it's purely publicly financed, that this data sharing infrastructure is provided as a public service, as a kind of critical infrastructure or infrastructure in general. Or you can envision, and there are examples of this, for example, Cofinity X in the Catena X ecosystem, that you have a for-profit company or a non-profit association whose business model relies on getting some sort of income from supporting use cases on its infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
But there are ways to go about it, depending on your goals and your profit motivation as well.
Perfect. Perfect. Thanks a lot, Vivi. Once again, we have last two questions. From one from audience, one from Ian Galvan. Thanks for your question. So the question is, what suggestion would the Potato X team have for addressing the GDPR difficulties mentioned? That's a very good question.
It's a very good question. As mentioned, I'm not a lawyer, and I will not be giving you good legal advice on this. I think we just need to get like this was a really short project, a 6-month pilot with Potato X. So we would really like to explore this in more detail in other contexts as well, to try and come up with because I don't think the situation is super clear for anyone. What we can do through the pilots like this is to provide clarity for policymakers. I mean, the Irish Commissioner has announced that the GDPR will be opened this year, at least in part. So the like exploring issues really around the GDPR in these contexts, in these pilots, should be going towards the European Commission and other policymakers and regulators to kind of keep them informed of the very concrete, practical kind of questions that come up when you are trying to facilitate data sharing in this context, and with kind of GDPR applicability as a question mark. Another kind of thing that I didn't mention with regard to the GDPR is obviously the fact that member states apply it and interpret it differently. So we didn't have huge kind of challenges with the Finland-Belgium interpretation differences, but I do know that other kind of combinations of other member states, it would if we're talking about cross-border data sharing, that's another kind of dimension of the GDPR that can kind of be a little bit problematic. But I think what I have heard lawyers say about the GDPR and wondering whether or not it applies is that it's personal data until you prove it isn't, right? And treat it as personal data until you can prove that it isn't. So the burden of proof is on that side. So that's one approach that I've heard. I wouldn't want to say make a comment on its legal validity though.
Thank you very much, Vivi. The last question for you, very quick one. How can data sharing agreement protect farmers when business or yields decline?
Protect farmers from uh business decline or yields decline. I'm not sure if I understand the question, sorry.
As if you have if you want to speak, you can speak actually.
Hi, can you hear me? So
Yes.
Yes.
actually we saw a positive use case. So
Yeah.
is there anything, some feedback given to the the infrastructure providing companies, what we have seen, different equipment providing companies? So is there any mechanisms that benefit can also be shared in case of any loss, any feedback sent back to the intermediate services provider or equipment provider, something like that? So we saw the positive side.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in other way, if that can also work, does this positive and negativity has been shared with those farmers or any association which they have, that look, if you share the data, you will get this benefit, or in case of some disaster, you will get this benefit, something like that.
Now I see your question. That's an interesting angle that I haven't considered and we didn't really look at in the Potato X project. No. I mean some kind of protective measures that these data sharing agreements can enforce are kind of protecting business critical data, which helps farmers kind of negotiate pricing. But kind of in case of, I'm not sure how a data intermediary or a data sharing arrangement can directly kind of help recoup losses or protect against kind of liabilities like that. No, I'd have to think about that a little bit more. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Okay, so we have to stop here. Thank you very much once again, Vivi. It was an honor, and thank you so much for sharing this short but very brilliant insights that you collected from the project and shared with us. I hope it was useful and insightful for all of our audiences. And thanks once again. Once again, thank you for your time. I know that you are very busy. Your time is really precious, and thanks a million for that. So yeah, so for the next webinar, so if you're interested, we'll send invitation to all of our participants today, and we will also announce. So the next webinar will be on the language data spaces, European Common Language Data Spaces. So if you're interested, feel free to join us in the next webinar. And thank you everyone for joining. Thank you for your time. We will share the recording, and feel free to ask any questions by email. We'll be happy to answer your questions. Thank you very much. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.